What does a man who has built a world from words do when he sees a woman with nothing? Give his son the one thing he can't write into existence? Julian Croft, a name known only to a select few in the world of publishing, was a ghost. To the world, he was Alistair Cain, the celebrated author of dark, intricate thrillers that sold by the millions. In reality, he was a recluse, a prisoner in a sprawling Boston brownstone, haunted by the slow, silent departure of his wife, Eleanor, 3 years prior. His son, Elias, was trapped in a different kind of silence, a world of perpetual twilight, his congenital blindness a barrier Julian didn't know how to breach. But one blustery autumn afternoon, in a forgotten diner smelling of fried onions and old coffee, a simple act of understanding from a struggling waitress would compose a new melody in their quiet lives, setting in motion a chain of events more unpredictable than any of his best-selling plots. This isn't just a story about fame and obscurity. It's about the languages we use to connect, the secrets that bind us, and how a simple, hummed tune can change a life forever. The name Alistair Cain was a brand. It promised sleepless nights, twisting plots, and a glimpse into the abyss of the human psyche. The name Julian Croft was a secret, guarded with monastic zeal by his longtime agent. At 55, Julian's silvering hair was more salt than pepper, and his perpetually tired eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a grief that no amount of literary acclaim could assuage. His life was a fortress of routine and silence, built to protect himself from a world that had taken too much. The fortress had been breached only by the slow, methodical cruelty of disease. Eleanor's illness had been a thief in the night, stealing her vitality piece by piece over 2 long years. Her death had not been a sudden crash, but a gradual fading, a diminuendo into silence that still echoed in every corner of their cavernous home. It had left him with their son, Elias, a brilliant, perceptive boy of 11, whose world was built not of light and shadow, but of sound, scent, and touch. Their home on Beacon Hill was a library of sorrow. Every surface was immaculate, managed by a small, discreet staff. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and lemon polish, a sterile environment where emotions were kept neatly on the shelf. Julian had tried to be a good father. He provided Elias with the finest auditory learning tools, world-renowned tutors in Braille and mobility, and a universe of audiobooks. But he couldn't give him the one thing he craved, a connection that wasn't filtered through a narrative or a lesson. Their conversations were stilted, filled with the awkward pauses of strangers. Julian saw in Elias's patient, unseeing face a constant reminder of Eleanor, of his own failure to protect his family from the quiet chaos of life. And so he retreated further into the fictional worlds he could control, leaving his son to navigate the real one alone. On this particular Tuesday, a rare technical glitch with his publisher's servers had brought his work to a grinding halt. The enforced idleness was a torment. The silence of the house pressed in. The housekeeper had the afternoon off. He found Elias in the music room, a space dedicated to Eleanor's memory, his small fingers tracing the keys of her unused Steinway. "Elias," Julian's voice was hoarse from disuse, "we're going out for lunch." Elias lifted his head, his face a mask of polite surprise. "Okay, Dad." The words were devoid of the enthusiasm an 11-year-old should possess. It was simply an acknowledgement of a change in schedule. Julian chose a place he hadn't been to in over a decade, a place he and Eleanor had stumbled upon during a long walk in their student days. The Blue Plate Diner. It was a relic, a small, unassuming spot tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, far from the polished restaurants he usually frequented for publishing meetings. Eleanor had loved its authenticity, its lack of pretense. He didn't know why he chose it now, perhaps as an act of penance, a desire to touch a piece of a past that felt more real than his present. The drive was quiet. Julian mentally outlined a chapter, his mind a more comfortable place than the passenger seat beside him. Elias sat perfectly still, his head cocked slightly as if listening to the rhythm of the city. The Blue Plate Diner was a symphony of chaos compared to their silent home. The sizzle of the grill, the clatter of plates, the low hum of conversation, the sharp scent of coffee. It was an assault on the senses. They were shown to a worn vinyl booth in the corner. Julian, out of habit, immediately began reviewing notes on his phone. I'll order for you, he said, not asking. He chose a grilled cheese and tomato soup for Elias, a classic, simple choice, and a club sandwich for himself. When the food arrived, the real problem began. It wasn't about messiness. Elias was meticulously neat. The problem was the noise. The cacophony of the diner was overwhelming his sensitive hearing. He couldn't isolate the sounds. They blended into a disorienting wall of static. He held his fork and knife, his knuckles white, his shoulders tensed up to his ears. A loud crash of plates from the kitchen made him flinch violently, a small, choked gasp escaping his lips. "I'm not hungry," he whispered, pushing the plate away. His face was pale, his distress palpable. Julian felt a familiar surge of helpless impatience, the frustration of a man who could solve the most complex fictional puzzles, but was utterly lost in the face of his own son's reality. "Just try to eat, Elias. It's just a bit of noise." He hadn't even looked up from his phone, his thumb still scrolling through emails from his agent. He was negotiating foreign rights for his last book, a task that felt infinitely more manageable than the crisis unfolding in his own booth. He didn't see the single tear that traced a path down his son's temple, but someone else did. Across the diner, a waitress named Isla Rose was refilling salt shakers. At 25, there was a weariness in her soft, hazel eyes, but it was overshadowed by a deep, resonant kindness. Her auburn hair was tied back in a messy bun, and every muscle in her body ached from a double shift she'd taken to help pay for her grandmother's medication. Isla had noticed the man and the boy the moment they walked in. She had a musician's ear for the rhythms of a room. She could hear the nervous energy of a first date, the comfortable silence of an old married couple, the boisterous laughter of students. She heard the discordance at table 7. She saw the father radiating an aura of intellectual distance, lost in the cold glow of his phone. And she saw the boy, his small body rigid with sensory overload, drowning in the diner's chaotic symphony. Her heart, attuned to quiet melodies, ached for him. She watched as the boy gave up on his meal. She saw the father's dismissive gesture, and in that moment, a quiet resolve settled over her. She took a deep breath and walked towards their table. A new composition, Isla approached the table, not as a waitress, but as a conductor approaching a discordant orchestra. She ignored the formidable presence of Julian Croft, whose gaze flickered up from his phone, a mask of annoyance at the interruption. Her focus was entirely on the small, distressed boy in the booth. She didn't kneel. Instead, she leaned against the adjacent table, creating a casual, non-threatening presence. Her voice was low and melodic, a cello's note in the diner's brassy din. "It's a lot, isn't it?" she began, her gaze soft and understanding. Elias flinched, expecting to be told he was making a scene. He kept his face turned down. "It's too loud." "I know," Isla said, her voice a gentle hum. "It's like every instrument is playing a different song at the same time. No rhythm, just noise." This unexpected, accurate description made Elias turn his head slightly in her direction, a flicker of bewildered curiosity on his face. Julian finally put his phone down, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What is this? If there's an issue, I'll handle it." His voice was the crisp rustle of a turning page, accustomed to immediate deference. Ayla met his cold stare without intimidation, but her response was directed back at Elias. "No issue at all, sir. I just have a theory about diners. You can't just listen to them. You have to find the beat." She leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Everything has a rhythm. You just have to find the bass line. Can I show you?" Elias was silent for a moment, then gave a hesitant, almost imperceptible nod. Julian watched, a strange feeling prickling his skin. No one spoke to him with such calm assurance. No one inserted themselves into his life. He was about to summon the manager to complain about this overly familiar waitress, but a novelist's curiosity held him back. He watched. "Okay," Isla said softly. "Close your eyes." "Oh, right." A faint, self-deprecating blush colored her cheeks. "Well, just listen with me. Forget the talking and the clatter. Listen for the bass drum. It's that big old refrigerator behind the counter." She began to hum a low, single note, a perfect match for the drone of the motor. "Hear that? Bum! That's our foundation. It never stops." She then lightly tapped a rhythm on the tabletop with her fingers, a simple 1-2 beat. Now listen for the percussion. The cook. Hear him? Spatula on the grill. Tss, tss, slap. Tss, tss, slap. He's our drummer. He's keeping a steady beat. She layered a more complex tapping rhythm over the first. Elias's head was now fully turned towards her, his expression rapt. A tiny smile touched his lips. It was the first time Julian had seen him smile outside their home in years. The sight was a punch to the gut. And I, Isla continued, her voice weaving a melody over the rhythms she was tapping. I'm the melody. My shoes squeaking, the coffee pot clinking. It's a little song about getting through the day. She hummed a simple, wistful folk tune, and for a moment, the chaotic noise of the diner seemed to rearrange itself around her, falling into a strange, coherent piece of music. The clatter of plates became a cymbal crash, the murmur of conversation a string section, the sizzle of the grill a steady hi-hat. She stopped tapping, and the diner was just a diner again, but the overwhelming static had been replaced by a manageable collection of sounds. Now you're the conductor, she said to Elias. You know all the parts. You can choose which one to listen to. The cook, Elias whispered. He dropped his tongs. A little unplanned percussion solo, Isla said with a grin. The best music has improvisation. She gently turned his plate towards him. And this soup is the quiet part, the adagio. It's warm, and it tastes like my grandmother's garden. A little thyme, a little basil. It's a quiet flavor for a loud room. Over the next 10 minutes, Julian Croft, the master manipulator of plot and character, sat silently and watched a waitress he'd dismissed as part of the scenery do what an army of therapists and tutors had failed to do. She hadn't just calmed his son, she had given him a tool. She had translated the world for him. She didn't pity him, she empowered him. She turned a chaotic diner into a symphony, a plate of soup into a quiet movement within it. Elias ate every bite of his grilled cheese and finished all of his soup. He even asked for a glass of milk, his voice clearer and more confident than Julian had heard it in months. When he was done, Ela returned, her smile genuine and warm. Bravo, maestro. For the first time that day, Elias turned his head in the direction of his father. Dad, he said, his voice ringing with a newfound clarity. Her name is Isla. Julian could only nod, his own voice momentarily lost. He looked at Isla, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the fatigue beneath the kindness in her eyes, the worn-out soles of her sensible shoes, the faded ink stain on the cuff of her sleeve. He saw a person who, despite her own obvious struggles, possessed an abundance of a currency he was bankrupt in. Genuine, creative empathy. When she stood up, preparing to leave them with the check, Julian found his voice. Wait, he commanded, the word rougher than he intended. He reached for his wallet, a thick black leather rectangle, and pulled out several crisp $100 bills. For your trouble. Isla looked at the money in his hand and then back at his face. A flicker of something, not disappointment, but a kind of gentle sadness, crossed her features. She pushed his hand back, her touch surprisingly firm. That's not necessary, sir. Hearing the music with him was more than enough tip for me. She glanced at Elias. It was a pleasure making music with you, maestro. And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the kitchen. Julian Croft sat there, the crisp bills still in his hand, feeling utterly and completely outmaneuvered. He had just witnessed a small, profound miracle, and his first brutish instinct had been to try and buy it. He looked at his son, who was sitting up straighter, a faint smile still lingering on his lips. For the first time in 3 years, the silence between them didn't feel like a chasm. It felt like a pause in the music, waiting for the next movement to begin. He had a problem far more intricate than any plot he could devise, and he had the strangest feeling he had just met the solution. But the solution had just refused his money. This was a language he didn't understand, and he was determined to learn it. An unorthodox offer. The next morning, the formidable apparatus that protected the identity of Alistair Kane was repurposed for a new, highly unusual task, to learn everything about Isla Rose. Julian didn't become one of the world's most successful authors by accident. He was a master of research, of understanding motive and character. His reaction in the diner, a potent cocktail of awe, guilt, and intellectual curiosity, had been processed overnight. Emotion was a narrative dead end. Action was plot progression. And the first action was always to gather intelligence. He didn't have a head of security like a corporate titan. He had something far more effective, his agent, Victoria Sterling. Victoria was a force of nature, a woman forged in the crucible of New York publishing. She was sharp, ruthless, and fiercely protective of her most valuable client. Her job was not just to sell books, but to maintain the lucrative mystique of Alistair Kane. She handled everything from contract negotiations to silencing nosy journalists with the precision of a surgeon. They spoke on a secure line. "I have a name," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of preamble. "Isla Rose. She's a waitress at the Blue Plate Diner. I want to know everything." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Victoria's mind, a calculator of risk and reward, was instantly whirring. "Is this for a new character, Julian? She sounds a little pedestrian for your usual fare." "This is not for a book, Victoria," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut through her professional veneer. "This is personal. I want a complete picture. Financials, family, history, education, everything. But she is not to be contacted. She is not to know she's being observed. Discretion is paramount." "Discretion is my middle name, darling," Victoria purred, the curiosity in her voice barely concealed. "Give me 48 hours. For the next 2 days, Victoria's network of private investigators, the same ones she used to dig up dirt on rival agents or vet potential biographers, went to work. They were ghosts in the machine, experts at navigating the digital and physical archives of a person's life without leaving a trace. The file that was encrypted and sent to Julian's computer 48 hours later was slim, but told a dense story of deferred dreams and heavy burdens. Subject: Isla Marie Rose. Age: 25. Address: a third-floor apartment over a laundromat in Alston. Rent: $400 a month, currently 2 weeks overdue. Financials: checking account balance, $112.58. Savings account, $35.70. Credit card debt, $8,750. Outstanding student loan debt, $55,000. Family: parents deceased. Car accident, age 16. Legal guardian was maternal grandmother, Eleanor Rose, age 72, who now resides with the subject. Eleanor suffers from severe rheumatoid arthritis. Medication costs are approximately $400 a month, partially covered by Medicare. Education: accepted to the Berklee College of Music composition major on a full scholarship. Dropped out after her sophomore year. Reason: grandmother's declining health and inability to manage her care from a distance. Employment history: waitress at the Blue Plate Diner for 3 years. Prior to that, various service industry jobs: coffee shop, bookstore, piano lounge as a busser. Impeccable record, known for being hardworking and kind. A former manager noted, "She hums when she works, used to drive me crazy, but the customers loved it." Notable information: the bulk of her credit card debt stemmed from uncovered medical expenses for her grandmother and emergency plumbing repairs in their apartment. There is no social media presence under her name. A search of public records reveals a single entry of note: a misdemeanor charge for trespassing at age 19. She and some other students were found after hours in a university concert hall. The charges were dropped. She told the campus police she just wanted to hear the silence of the room. Julian read the report 3 times. The knot in his stomach, a familiar companion since his wife's death, tightened. This wasn't the profile of a hustler or an opportunist. This was the story of a young woman who had sacrificed her own symphony for the sake of one elderly woman, a woman who was quietly drowning in a sea of debt and responsibility. And yet, despite it all, she had found the grace to stand in a noisy diner and conduct a symphony for a stranger's child. The detail about the trespassing charge, she just wanted to hear the silence of the room, resonated with him deeply. It was a sentiment only another artist could truly understand. He thought of her in that diner, her refusal of his money. He saw it clearly now. It wasn't pride, it was principle. She had offered a moment of genuine human connection, a piece of her art, and he had responded with a crass transaction. She hadn't rejected his money, she had rejected his worldview, a world where everything had a price tag. He closed the file. The investigation had answered his questions, but it had also posed a new, more difficult one. What do you offer a person who has nothing yet seems to possess the one thing you can no longer create? His mind, accustomed to structuring complex narratives, began to formulate a new kind of offer. It couldn't be charity. Her profile screamed that she would reject it. It had to be a proposition, a collaboration. It had to be an offer that solved a problem for both of them. He needed someone to help his son compose a life out of the senses he had. She needed a patron, a producer, a way to finish her own interrupted composition. He picked up his phone, not to call his agent, but to call the Blue Plate Diner. "I'd like to make a reservation for 2 for this evening," he said, "and I have a special request. I need to ensure our server is Isla." He was done observing. It was time to write a new scene. The evening shift was dragging. Isla's feet throbbed in her worn-out sneakers, and her mind was a frantic calculator of bills and expenses. The rent was late. Her grandmother had a new prescription that wasn't covered. Her landlord had been by again, his patience wearing thin. Amidst the stress, the memory of the boy in the diner surfaced, a single, pure note in a discordant day. Elias. She remembered the focused, peaceful expression on his face as he'd eaten his soup. For a few brief minutes, she'd felt like she was doing more than just carrying plates. She was creating harmony. When she arrived at work, her manager, a harried man named Gus, pulled her aside. "Rose, table 7, the corner booth. They're asking for you specifically." Isla's stomach clenched. A specific request usually meant a complaint. She steeled herself and walked toward the booth, her order pad in hand. It was them, the man with the winter sky eyes and his quiet, blind son. Julian Croft was not on his phone. He sat opposite Elias, and the table between them was empty save for 2 glasses of water. His entire focus was on her as she approached, an unnerving, analytical gaze that felt like it was reading her very soul. "Good evening," Isla said, her voice professionally steady despite the nervous tremor she felt. "Welcome back. It's good to see you again, Elias." She made a point of addressing the boy first. Elias's head turned toward the sound of her voice, and a genuine, radiant smile transformed his face. "Isla, you're here." "I'm here," she confirmed warmly. "What can I get for you gentlemen tonight?" "We are not here to eat, Ms. Rose," Julian stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He gestured to the seat beside his son. "Please sit down. I would like to have a conversation with you. I will compensate you for your time, and I have already cleared it with your manager." Isla froze. This was beyond unusual, but one look at the man's unyielding expression and Gus's frantic nodding from behind the counter told her this was not a request she could refuse. She slid hesitantly into the booth beside Elias. "My name is Julian Croft," he said formally, extending a hand across the table. She shook it. His grip was firm and cool, the hand of a man who spent his days with a pen, not a hammer. "And this is my son, Elias." "It's a pleasure to meet you both properly," she replied, her mind racing. What could this possibly be about? "Ms. Rose," Julian began, leaning forward slightly, "I am a man who deals in structure and substance. I don't waste time on superfluous exposition. What I witnessed you do for my son 2 days ago was effective. Remarkable felt too emotional, too revealing. Effective was a word he could control. Isla felt a blush creep up her neck. "I was just trying to help." "No," Julian corrected her instantly, his voice precise. "Your job is to take orders and serve food. What you did was something else entirely. You didn't just distract him. You gave him a system. You translated chaos into order. In 10 minutes, you provided him with a cognitive tool more useful than anything his tutors have given him in a year." He paused, letting his words sink in. Elias's world is a constant barrage of information without the filter of sight. He navigates by sound, and sometimes the sound is overwhelming. I have been unable to help him manage it. The admission was stark, stripped of emotion, a simple statement of fact, but it was the most personal thing she had ever heard a stranger say. "I'm so sorry," Isla whispered, her heart going out to the boy beside her. Julian waved her sympathy away. "I am not looking for empathy, Ms. Rose. I am looking for a solution. I want to offer you a position." Isla blinked, completely thrown. "A position? I have a job." An arrangement, then, he clarified. I want you to become Elias's sensory interpreter, not a governess, not a tutor in the traditional sense, a guide, someone to help him build systems to process the world, someone to do for him, on a larger scale, what you did in this diner, to help him find the rhythm in the noise. He then laid out the terms as if he were outlining a book deal. Your duties would involve accompanying him in the world, to museums, parks, concerts. Your task would be to help him deconstruct the sensory experience, to find the melody in a crowded street, the rhythm in a sculpture's lines through touch, the narrative in a piece of music. The hours would be from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m., Monday to Friday. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. And this would be your compensation. Isla's hand trembled as she unfolded it. She saw a number. It wasn't just a salary. It was a lifeline. It was a figure so astronomical it seemed like a typo. It was enough to pay off her student loans, her credit card debt, every medical bill her grandmother had ever incurred, with enough left over to ensure she never had to worry about money again. It was the end of anxiety. It was the beginning of a dream, and it terrified her. Why me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You're clearly a man of means. You could hire the world's leading experts in audiology, in cognitive science. I have, Julian said flatly. I have hired the experts. They bring him charts and theories and methodologies. They see his condition. You saw a boy overwhelmed in a noisy diner. Your qualification, Ms. Rose, is not on your resume. It's in your approach. It's something that cannot be taught. Isla looked at Elias, who had been listening intently, his face a study in concentration. He reached out a small hand, his fingers brushing against her arm. Please, Isla, he asked, his voice soft and full of a hope that was heartbreaking. Her defenses crumbled. She looked back at the number on the paper, a figure that represented freedom. Then she looked at the hopeful face of a lonely, brilliant boy. The money was life-altering, but it was his plea that sealed the deal. But she was no fool. This world of unimaginable wealth was foreign and potentially dangerous. On a trial basis, she heard herself say, the words sounding more confident than she felt. 1 month, to see if it's a good fit for all of us. Julian Croft leaned back, a flicker of something that might have been respect in his eyes. He had expected her to be overwhelmed, to gush with gratitude. Instead, she was negotiating. 1 month, he agreed with a crisp nod. You'll start on Monday. My assistant will be in touch with a contract. The meeting was over. As he and Elias stood to leave, Isla spoke one last time. Mr. Croft, he turned, there's one condition. And what is that? When I am with Elias, she said, her gaze steady, your phone stays in your pocket. For the second time in their acquaintance, Julian Croft was rendered speechless. He simply stared at her, then gave a single sharp nod of assent before turning and guiding his son out of the diner. Isla remained in the booth, the paper clutched in her hand. The cacophony of the diner faded into a dull roar. Her life had just taken a turn so sharp and unexpected, she felt a profound sense of vertigo. She didn't know if she was stepping onto a stage or into a cage. The gathering storm, the Julian Croft residence on Beacon Hill, was less a home and more a curated archive of a life that had been put on hold. It was a world of polished mahogany, worn leather, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that seemed to absorb all sound, creating a profound scholarly silence. On her first day, Ela felt her worn-out boots were a sacrilege on the antique Persian rugs. But Elias met her at the door, his face alight with an excitement that was a stark contrast to the home's solemnity. Isla, I knew it was you by the rhythm of your footsteps on the stairs. Hey, Elias, Isla smiled, her own nervousness melting away in the face of his joy. Ready for our first lesson? What are we going to study? He asked eagerly. The house, Isla replied, dropping her tote bag to the floor with a soft thud. We're going to listen to what it has to say. Over the next few weeks, Isla didn't just guide Elias through the outside world, she reintroduced him to his own. She taught him to feel the subtle vibrations in the floor when the furnace kicked on, to identify the different kinds of wood in the furniture by their scent and texture, to map the entire house by the unique echo each room produced. The house transformed from a silent museum into a living, breathing instrument that Elias was learning to play. They moved their lessons outdoors. At the symphony, she didn't just let him listen to the music. She had him place his hands on the stage to feel the vibrations of the cellos, and she described the conductor's movements as a frantic, passionate dance. In the public garden, she didn't just describe the swan boats. She had him trail his fingers in the water to feel their wake, to feel the gentle rocking as they passed. She was giving him data points, new layers of texture to build his understanding of the world. And slowly, cautiously, Julian began to be drawn into their orbit. He started ending his workday at 5 instead of 8. He would sit in his study, the door open, just listening to the sound of their laughter, a sound that had been absent from his home for too long. True to Isla's condition, his phone remained in his pocket. He began to observe, not as a researcher, but as a father. One evening, he found them on the floor of the living room, surrounded by an array of objects Isla had brought in a large bag. Sandpaper, silk, a bowl of uncooked rice, a tuning fork. She was teaching him about texture and resonance. "Dad," Elias said, his head turning toward the sound of Julian's footsteps. "Ayla says every object has its own voice, a secret one. Do you want to listen?" Before he could demur, Isla was handing him a small, smooth riverstone. "The stone's voice is old and patient," she said with a grin. "You have to be very quiet to hear it." And so Julian Croft, the reclusive literary giant, found himself sitting cross-legged on his expensive rug, holding a simple stone, and for the first time, truly listening to the silence of his own home. He wasn't just observing his son's world. He was being invited to participate in it. The house began to change. A strange mobile made of driftwood and bottle caps hung in the kitchen, a testament to a day spent at the beach exploring sound and texture. The silence was no longer heavy and oppressive. It was filled with a quiet hum of life. But as light and music began to filter back into the Croft home, a shadow was lengthening in the periphery. Not everyone was pleased with this new composition. Victoria Sterling arrived unannounced one afternoon, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and sharp, clicking heels. She saw herself not just as Julian's agent, but as the architect and guardian of the Alistair Kane empire. She managed his life, curated his image, and protected him from the distractions of the outside world, ensuring the multi-million-dollar literary machine kept running smoothly. She found Julian, Isla, and Elias in the library, not reading, but building a story together. Isla would provide a sound, the crinkle of paper, the tap of a pen on a glass, and Elias and Julian would each add a sentence to a collaborative, fantastical tale inspired by the noise. Julian was laughing, a real unforced laugh. Victoria stopped dead in the doorway, her perfectly lipstick mouth tightening into a thin line. "Julian, darling, I tried to call. You didn't answer." Her voice was a silken blade. "We were busy, Victoria," Julian said, his smile fading slightly. Victoria's sharp eyes swept over Isla, taking in her simple dress and worn cardigan. She saw not a companion, but a complication, a variable she hadn't accounted for, an unprofessional emotional element introduced into her carefully controlled equation. "I see," Victoria said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You must be the new tutor." The word was laced with condescension. From that moment, Victoria saw Isla as a threat. Julian's newfound happiness was, in her eyes, a dangerous distraction. A happy, fulfilled author might not feel the same compulsive need to retreat into the dark, marketable worlds he created. A happy author might produce less, and less production meant a smaller commission. She saw Isla not just as a financial threat, but as a threat to her influence, her carefully cultivated role as the most important person in Julian Croft's isolated world. She began to watch, to listen, her mind cataloging every detail, searching for a weakness, a discordant note she could use to sever Isla's connection to the family. She was determined to expose the girl for the amateur, sentimental fool she believed her to be, and restore order to her perfectly crafted narrative. Victoria Sterling was a master of plot, and she was already writing Esla Rose out of the story. Victoria's methods were far more insidious than simple accusations. She fought her battles in the subtext, with veiled comments and carefully engineered situations designed to undermine Julian's trust in Isla. Her campaign was a masterclass in psychological warfare. She began with Julian's work. "Julian, darling," she'd say over the phone, her voice dripping with manufactured concern, "the new pages are wonderful, but they lack the edge, the darkness your readers expect. This new lightness. It's lovely for you, personally, but I worry about the brand." Then she moved to his finances. She'd present him with expense reports. "The salary we're paying this girl, it's extraordinarily generous. And I see she's purchased a new keyboard, some recording equipment for Elias. I just want to ensure your generosity isn't being taken advantage of." Isla, meanwhile, was completely unaware of the machinations in the background. Her focus was entirely on Elias. She discovered he had perfect pitch and a profound gift for composition. The simple melodies he'd picked out on the piano were becoming more complex, more emotive. He was building worlds of sound, translating his feelings and experiences into music. Her work with him felt less like a job and more like the most important collaboration of her life. Her relationship with Julian was also deepening. The quiet evenings after Elias was asleep were now filled with conversation. He spoke of Eleanor, not with the raw, silent grief he'd held for years, but with a gentle nostalgia, sharing stories of her wit and passion. In return, Isla shared her own music with him, playing him her compositions, the pieces she'd been forced to abandon when she left school. He listened with an intensity and understanding that no one ever had before, recognizing the narrative structure, the character development, the rising and falling action within her melodies. He saw her not as an employee, but as a fellow artist. The centerpiece of Victoria's plan involved Julian's most guarded secret, his next book. It was a radical departure from his Alistair Cain thrillers. It was a deeply personal novel about a grieving father and his son, a raw and honest exploration of his own life. Only he and Victoria had seen the manuscript. It was his soul on the page, and the thought of it being exposed to the world before he was ready was his greatest fear. Victoria knew this. She also knew that Isla had an old acquaintance from her brief time at Berkeley, who was now a struggling freelance journalist. It took Victoria's investigator less than a day to find him. The plan was brilliant in its cruelty. She would leak a small, carefully chosen, but undeniably authentic portion of the manuscript herself, and she would create a digital trail that led directly to Isla. The execution was flawless. An anonymous email, sent from a public library computer, landed in the inbox of a notorious online gossip columnist. The email contained a single page from Julian's new work, a poignant, heartbreaking scene between the father and son, along with a tip. Alistair Cain's new book is about his own tragic life. His son's companion is shopping it around. The story exploded online. The mystique of the reclusive Alistair Cain was shattered. His private grief was suddenly public speculation. Julian was apoplectic. It was the ultimate betrayal, a violation of his deepest trust. He was in his office, the offending article glowing on his screen, when Victoria arrived, her face a perfect mask of righteous fury and sympathetic concern. "I cannot believe this, Julian," she said, her voice trembling with practiced rage. "I've already had my people look into this. The leak, it's unthinkable." She placed a thin file on his desk. "The journalist who broke the story, his name is Markham. He was in the same program as Isla Rose at Berkeley. They were in a composition class together, and my tech guy traced the IP address of the email. It's from a library 2 blocks from her apartment." The pieces, so perfectly arranged by Victoria, clicked into place in Julian's mind. The waitress with the mountain of debt, the girl who had been given intimate access to his home, his son, his life. His old defenses, the walls he had built to protect himself, came roaring back. He had allowed himself to be vulnerable, to trust, and this was the result. The kindness, the music, the laughter. Was it all just research? An elaborate scheme to get her hands on the most valuable story of all? His, the rage and betrayal were a cold poison in his veins. He stormed out of his office and into the music room, where Isla was helping Elias work through a new composition. Victoria followed, a silent, triumphant wraith. "Isla." His voice was a low growl, a sound she had never heard before. It was the voice of Alistair Cain, cold and menacing. Isla and Elias both looked up, startled. Julian, what's wrong? Don't call me Julian, he snarled. Did you enjoy your time in my home? Did you get all the material you needed? He threw a printed copy of the gossip column on the piano keys, creating a harsh, dissonant chord. Isla stared at him, her face a canvas of confusion and horror. What? What is this? I don't understand. Don't play innocent with me, he roared. My book, my life. It's all over the internet. And Victoria has found the most interesting connection between the journalist and a certain composition student from Berkeley. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Isla felt the blood drain from her face. She looked from Julian's accusing glare to Victoria's mask of pitying concern. She understood instantly. This was a setup, a perfectly composed piece of malice. No, she stammered, her voice trembling. I would never. You can't possibly believe I would do that. I believe you are a young woman who was desperate, he retorted, his voice dripping with ice. It is the oldest motive in the book. Tears of disbelief and hurt stung Isla's eyes. It wasn't the accusation itself that broke her heart. It was the fact that he could believe it, that after everything they had shared, after the trust he had shown her, he could still see her as nothing more than the sum of her debts. Elias, go to your room, Julian ordered. No! Elias's voice was surprisingly steady. He stood up from the piano bench, his small hands clenched into fists, and moved to stand next to Isla, placing his hand in hers. She didn't do it. Elias, this is between the adults. Go to your room. Now, Julian repeated, his voice dangerously low. No, Elias said again, his voice rising, clear and strong. You're wrong, Dad. I can hear it. Hear what? Julian asked, exasperated. Their heartbeats, Elias said simply. When you're angry, your heart is like a drum, fast and loud. When Isla is happy, it's like a waltz, steady and calm. Right now, it's slow. It's a funeral march. It's sad, but it's slow. He then turned his head in the direction of the silent, observing Victoria. Her heart, it's different. It's a hummingbird. It's too fast. Like when she tells you the early sales numbers are better than they really are. So you won't worry. It's the sound of a lie. Elias's defense, so strange and so unwavering, struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. He looked at his son, truly looked at him, and saw not a naive child, but a finely tuned instrument of perception. He saw a boy defending the only person who had ever taught him how to truly listen to the world. Then he looked at Isla. Her back was straight, and though tears streamed down her face, her eyes met his with a look of profound, dignified hurt. You can believe whatever you want, Mr. Croft, she said, her voice quiet but strong. You can believe the story your agent wrote for you, but my conscience is clear. I hope one day you learn to listen as well as your son does. She bent down and hugged Elias fiercely. Keep composing, she whispered into his hair. Then she stood, turned, and walked out of the room, out of the house, out of their lives. The sound of the front door closing echoed in the sudden, crushing silence. Julian was left standing with his furious, heartbroken son and his scheming agent. He looked at Victoria's face, and for the first time, he noticed the frantic, triumphant glitter in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hand. He heard the hummingbird heart. In that moment, Julian Croft felt the full, crushing weight of his monumental error. He had just destroyed the most beautiful composition in his life, all based on a skillfully crafted lie and an old, cynical belief system that had brought him nothing but loneliness and misery. The logical conclusion he'd been so proud of suddenly seemed like the most profound foolishness of his life. The coda. The silence that descended upon the Beacon Hill brownstone after Isla's departure was a tangible thing, a heavy shroud that suffocated all life. Elias retreated into himself, refusing to speak to his father, the music room door staying firmly shut. The house was once again a library of sorrow, the tentative melody of their happiness abruptly cut short. Julian was left alone with the discordant echo of his own rage. Elias's words haunted him. Her heart is the sound of a lie. The boy's unique perception, which Julian had once pitied as a limitation, was now revealed as a profound and incisive tool of truth. He had been deaf, while his blind son had seen everything. He had betrayed them both. He hadn't just accused an innocent woman. He had shown his son that his own judgment, his own carefully honed senses, meant nothing in the face of his father's fear and suspicion. His gaze fell upon Victoria, who was attempting to smooth things over. "It's for the best, Julian. She was a liability. Now we can focus on damage control for the book." Suddenly, his grief-fogged mind achieved a horrifying clarity. He saw her not as a protector, but as a warden. He saw the years of subtle manipulation, the way she had encouraged his isolation because it served her purposes, the way she treated his art not as a creation, but as a product. She hadn't been protecting his legacy, she had been protecting her investment. He looked at her, and a cold, precise anger, the kind he usually reserved for a villain on the page, took hold. "Get out," he said, his voice quiet and deadly. Victoria was taken aback. "What? Julian, I was only trying to help." "I know exactly what you were trying to do," he cut her off, his eyes like chips of ice. "You saw me building a life outside of my work, and you couldn't stand it. You saw a happiness that you couldn't control or monetize. So you wrote a new plot, with a villain and a victim. You orchestrated this entire pathetic drama to get what you wanted." He walked to his desk and pulled out his phone. "Our professional relationship is terminated, effective immediately. If you or any of your associates attempt to contact me or my son again, you will be hearing from my lawyers." He didn't need an investigator this time. He just needed to listen. The truth was ringing in his ears. Victoria, for the first time in her professional life, was speechless. She saw in his eyes that the game was over. She turned, her clicking heels a sharp, angry staccato on the floorboards, and left his life forever. Armed with the truth, Julian felt no triumph, only a deep, hollow shame. He had allowed his own cynicism, expertly played by Victoria, to destroy something beautiful. Now he had to try and rewrite the ending. He didn't send a driver or an assistant. He drove himself to Alston, to the third-floor apartment over the laundromat listed in the file he still had. He climbed the creaking stairs, the air thick with the smell of detergent and dampness, a world away from his climate-controlled life. He knocked on her door, his heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm. Isla opened it. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. She wasn't surprised to see him. She just looked tired. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Isla," he began, his own voice sounding foreign and strained. "There are no words, no apology I can write that would be sufficient. I was a fool. I was a coward. I listened to the wrong story. I let my fear and my past cloud my judgment, and I broke the trust of the two most important people in my life." He held out a large manila envelope. "This is not an attempt to buy your forgiveness," he said quickly, seeing the hesitation in her face. "It can't be bought. This is restitution. It's me trying to fix the part of the story I can." She hesitantly took the envelope. Inside were documents. The first was a deed transferring ownership of her apartment to her grandmother, the mortgage paid in full. The second was a cashier's check made out to her, a sum large enough to erase every debt she had and provide for her grandmother's care for the rest of her life. The third was a letter. It was from the Dean of Admissions at the Berklee College of Music, officially reinstating her scholarship. Funded by a new, anonymous endowment established in her name for students who had to leave for family reasons. Isla stared at the papers, her eyes welling up with tears. This was everything. It was freedom. It was the future she had sacrificed. "This isn't a transaction," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is me trying to restore a harmony that should never have been broken. It's an apology in the only language I know how to speak. But it's not the most important thing." "And Elias," she asked, her voice a whisper. "How is he?" "He's silent," Julian admitted, the words of physical pain. "The music is gone, and I'm the one who silenced it. He needs you, Isla. I know I have no right to ask, but I need you too. You didn't just teach my son how to listen to the world. You taught me how to listen to my own heart. You brought our family back to life. Please, come back, not as an employee, as our collaborator, our partner." Isla looked past him, down the dingy hallway, and saw the life of struggle she was so accustomed to. Then she looked at the papers in her hand, a future she never thought possible. But more powerfully than either, she thought of Elias. Alone in his quiet room, the music silenced. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I have one condition, Julian." He held his breath. "Anything." "The three of us," she said. "We're going to finish that story we started. The one about the crinkling paper and the tapping pen. And this time, you're not allowed to edit." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over Julian Croft. He nodded, a genuine, unforced smile reaching his eyes for the first time in years. "It's a deal." The Julian Croft residence was never the same again. It became a home filled not with silence, but with music. The smell of old books now mingled with the scent of rosin from Isla's cello, and the sound of Elias's increasingly complex piano compositions became the house's heartbeat. Ela went back to school, her talent finally unleashed, astounding her professors. But she never truly left them. She became the vibrant, steady heart of their small, unconventional family. Julian, with Isla's encouragement, published his personal novel under his own name. It didn't sell like an Alistair Kane thriller, but it earned him something far more valuable: critical acclaim for his honesty and a profound connection with his readers. He dedicated it simply, "For Isla and Elias, who taught me to listen." Together, the three of them, the author who had lived in silence, the boy who saw with his ears, and the waitress who heard the music in everything, composed a new life, a symphony richer and more beautiful than any of them could have ever imagined alone.